Commander stood on the bridge of his warship and watched the screens with growing satisfaction. The fleet had traveled for weeks to reach this backwater system, and now it stretched behind him like a wave of steel and fire. 200 ships, each one capable of burning a city to ash. The Dominion had ruled this section of the galaxy for 3,000 cycles, and no one had ever stood against them for long. The system ahead was called Sol by its inhabitants. The primitive species there called themselves humans. According to the Dominion's records, they had only achieved basic 2 centuries ago. They would surrender quickly like all the others. Had done this 17 times before. It was always the same. "Begin scanning," he ordered. His crew moved efficiently, their gray hands dancing across control panels. Within moments, data began flooding the screens. Frowned, something was wrong. The readings showed far more activity than expected. The human's home planet, called Earth, showed the expected signs of civilization, but so did its moon, and the 4th planet, and dozens of other locations throughout the system. Officer A explained these readings, said, keeping his voice calm. The junior officer's skin flushed yellow with uncertainty. "Commander, it appears the humans have spread throughout their entire system. We're detecting habitats on asteroids, stations orbiting gas giants, and what appear to be fully functioning colonies on multiple moons." His frown deepened. This didn't match the intelligence reports. How had such a primitive species accomplished so much in only 200 years? They must have had help, he decided. Perhaps another species gave them technology. It doesn't matter. Send the standard message. They have 1 cycle to surrender, or we will begin orbital bombardment. The message was transmitted on all frequencies. It was simple and clear. Submit to the Dominion or die. The humans would have 12 hours to respond. 6 hours later, there had been no response at all. No pleas for mercy, no desperate negotiations, no surrender, just silence. "Perhaps they don't understand the severity of their situation," A suggested. Activated the fleet-wide channel. "All ships, advance to combat positions. Target their largest settlements. We'll give them 1 more hour, then we'll show them what defiance costs." The fleet moved forward, each ship taking up its assigned position. They formed a pattern that had conquered 40 systems. Overwhelming force, clearly displayed with no possibility of escape. It always worked. The hour passed, still no surrender came. "Begin the attack," ordered. 20 ships broke formation and accelerated toward the human home world. Their weapons charged, ready to devastate the planet's northern continent. The humans would see their cities burn, and the sensors screamed a warning half a second before the first missile struck. Ship rocked violently. On the screens, he watched 3 of his ships explode in brilliant flashes of light. The missiles had come from empty space, from directions his scanners had marked as clear. "Where did those come from?" he roared. "Unknown, Commander, scanning now." More missiles appeared, dozens of them, streaking in from the asteroid belt. Small human fighters emerged from hiding spots among the rocks, moving impossibly fast. They weren't flying straight attack runs like any sensible pilot would. They were tumbling, spinning, using angles of attack that made no sense. "Target those fighters," ordered. His gunners tried. They failed. The human pilots moved like nothing they had ever seen. They used the asteroids themselves as shields, disappearing behind one rock and emerging from behind another. They fired their weapons while spinning, while diving, while pulling maneuvers that should have knocked their pilots unconscious from the forces involved. A human fighter, smaller than a shuttle, somehow dodged 3 simultaneous plasma bursts and put a missile straight through the bridge of the warship, devastating fire. The massive vessel listed to one side, atmosphere venting from a dozen breaches. "How are they doing this?" A's voice had risen to a panicked pitch. Watched the screens with growing horror. More human ships were emerging now, not from planets or stations, but from the asteroid belt itself. They'd been hiding there, waiting, and they weren't fighting like planet dwellers. They were fighting like creatures born to the void. A destroyer on his left flank exploded. Then another. The humans were everywhere now, small ships darting between his larger vessels like predators among prey. They used the debris from destroyed ships as cover. They fired from angles that ignored any concept of up or down. They moved in 3 dimensions like fish in water, and his crews, all planet-born, couldn't keep up. "All ships retreat to defensive formation Delta," commanded. The fleet tried to regroup, but the humans didn't let them. They pressed their attack, focusing on ships that broke formation. A cruiser that moved too slowly was swarmed by 6 human fighters. Its shields collapsed under concentrated fire, and then it was gone. Its own ship shuddered as weapons fire raked across its hull. The humans were targeting his command vessel now. He watched a fighter pilot pull a maneuver that should have been impossible, flipping her craft end over end while maintaining forward momentum, firing thrusters in a pattern that is understanding of physics. "How did they learn to fly like that?" he whispered. To her credit, had kept analyzing the data even amid the chaos. "Commander, I think I understand. Look at the life sign readings from those fighters. The pilots aren't experiencing the G-forces we expected. Their bodies are reading as if they're in near-zero gravity, even during extreme maneuvers." Stared at the data. It was impossible unless they grew up in space, he said slowly. Not on their planet, in space itself. The realization hit him like a physical blow. These weren't planet dwellers who had learned to fly. These were void-born warriors who had never known gravity. They'd spent their entire lives in rotating stations and zero-gravity environments. To them, this wasn't a battlefield in some alien territory. This was home. Another explosion lit up the screens. The heavy cruiser Iron Dominance broke in half, its reactor going critical. That made 38 ships lost in less than an hour. "Commander, we can't sustain these losses," I said. "We need to retreat." Every instinct had rebelled against the idea. The Dominion didn't retreat. They didn't run from primitive species. But as he watched another 2 ships die under human weapons fire, he knew he had no choice. "All ships fall back to the outer system. Emergency jump coordinates uploading now." The fleet broke and ran. It was a chaotic retreat, with human fighters pursuing them until the last possible moment. By the time battered forces reached the jump point and escaped to faster-than-light travel, he'd lost 43 ships and over 12,000 crew. He'd also lost something more important, the certainty that the Dominion was invincible. 3 weeks later, stood before the Dominion Council and delivered his report. The 7 council members listened in silence from their elevated seats, their faces unreadable. "You lost 43 ships to a primitive species," council leader Or said when finished. "Explain how this is possible." "The humans are not primitive," said carefully. "They've adapted to space in ways we never anticipated. Their pilots are born in zero gravity. They think in 3 dimensions naturally. They've spread throughout their system not as colonists, but as natives. Fighting them in space is like fighting fish in water." "We've conquered species who lived in water," Or replied coldly. "Yes, by draining their oceans," said. "But space cannot be drained, it's infinite, and the humans have made it their home." "Then we will send a larger fleet," another council member said. "We will overwhelm them with numbers." Wanted to argue, to tell them it wouldn't work, that humanity was different from any species they'd faced before. But he was a soldier, and soldiers followed orders. "As you command," he said, bowing. The council authorized the deployment of the Grand Armada. 3,000 ships, the largest fleet ever assembled in Dominion history. It would take months to gather them all, but when they arrived at the Sol system, no force in the known galaxy could stop them. At least, that's what the Council believed. While the Dominion prepared its massive fleet, something else was happening. Scout ships, operating in neighboring systems, began detecting strange signals. Human signals. The primitives had somehow spread beyond their home system. They'd established outposts, refueling stations, and even small colonies in 3 nearby systems. How was this possible? How had they moved so far so fast? The answer, when it finally became clear, was simple and terrifying. Humanity hadn't asked permission to claim the stars. They hadn't waited for technology to be perfect or for their governments to approve expansion plans. They'd simply built ships, pointed them at distant stars, and gone. Generation ships, some of them centuries old, had been traveling through the void since humanity's earliest days in space. People had been born, lived, and died aboard those vessels, never touching a planet. When they finally reached distant stars, they'd built more stations, more habitats, more homes in the empty dark. The humans weren't expanding into space. They'd already expanded. They'd been doing it for generations, quietly, without anyone noticing. And now that the Dominion had attacked them, all of those scattered outposts, all of those distant colonies, all of those void-born warriors were turning their attention back toward home. The Grand Armada was gathering its strength for one massive assault, but humanity was already preparing its defense, and that defense stretched across a dozen star systems. The Dominion was about to learn that you cannot conquer a species that has already conquered the stars themselves. In a rotating habitat orbiting series, a woman named Sarah checked her fighter's systems one more time. She'd been born in this habitat 32 years ago. She'd never touched a planet's surface, never felt rain, never experienced gravity stronger than the gentle spin of her home. But she could fly a combat craft through an asteroid field with her eyes closed. She and 10,000 pilots like her were ready. The Dominion would come with their Grand Armada, confident in their numbers. They would learn what had learned, but too late to save themselves. The Starborn were ready for war. The Grand Armada arrived at the Sol system 6 months after its defeat. Supreme Commander watched with satisfaction as 3,000 warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel in perfect formation. This was the largest military force the Dominion had ever assembled. It represented the combined might of 40 conquered worlds. Had reviewed reports carefully. The humans were dangerous, yes, but they were still just one species in one system. 3,000 ships would be more than enough. He would not make the mistake of underestimating them. "Open all channels," he ordered. "Transmit the ultimatum." His communications officer. The message went out in every language the Dominion had on file for the humans. It was simple. Surrender completely within 24 hours, or every human habitat would be destroyed. Every station, every colony, every ship, total extinction. The response came within minutes, but not from Earth's governments. It came from hundreds of sources at once. Belt miners, Martian Defense Forces, Jovian Patrol Wings, and dozens of other groups, all broadcasting the same message. 3 words in the human language called English. "Come and take it." Skin flushed dark with anger. "So be it. All ships advance. Target their major population centers. Will burn their worlds until they beg for mercy." The Grand Armada moved forward like an unstoppable wave. The lead ships entered the asteroid belt first, weapons charged and ready. This time, the Dominion was prepared for ambushes. They had scanners running at maximum sensitivity. They had point defense systems active. They had fighter screens deployed. It didn't matter. The humans hit them from every direction at once. Missiles launched from rocks that scanners had marked as inactive. Fighters emerged from the shadows of larger asteroids, their engines cold until the last possible second. Mining laser platforms, supposedly civilian equipment, suddenly became weapons that could slice through a warship's hull. But this time the Dominion was ready. For every human attack, they had a counter. Their point defense systems shot down incoming missiles. Their fighters engaged the human pilots. Their heavy ships used gravity weapons to pull asteroids out of position, eliminating hiding spots. The battle raged for hours. Ships died on both sides. A human station near Ceres took a direct hit from a Dominion dreadnought and broke apart, killing everyone inside. Thousands dead in an instant. But even as it died, human ships swarmed the dreadnought from below, their pilots attacking with a fury that couldn't match. Sarah was one of those pilots. She'd watched her home die on her screens, watched the habitat where she'd been born tumble through space as a lifeless hulk. She'd watched her friends, her family, her entire world torn apart. Now she flew with a cold precision that scared even her. She knew every rock in this part of the belt. She'd grown up playing in these spaces, racing other children through the gaps between asteroids. Her fighter danced through the battlefield like it was a game, except now the shots were real and the stakes were survival. She locked onto the dreadnought that had killed her home. Its shields were down from the previous attacks. She armed her last missile and dove toward it, ignoring the defensive fire that lit up space around her. Her craft took hits, warnings blaring, but she didn't stop. The missile launched at point-blank range, straight into the dreadnought's main reactor. Sarah pulled up hard, her fighter's engine screaming, and barely escaped the explosion that followed. The massive ship broke in half, both pieces tumbling away in different directions. One target down, hundreds more to go. All across the battlefield, similar scenes played out. Human pilots who'd spent their lives in zero gravity fought with a desperation and skill that shocked the Dominion forces. They weren't just defending territory. They were defending their homes, their families, their entire way of life. But the Dominion had numbers. For every warship the humans destroyed, two more took its place. Human casualties were mounting. Stations fell. Colonies were evacuated seconds before Dominion weapons turned them to debris. The belt was filling with wreckage from both sides. Watched the battle from his command ship, staying safely back from the front lines. The humans were fighting well, but they couldn't win. Simple mathematics ensured that. He had 3,000 ships. They had perhaps 500 combat-capable vessels. Eventually, they would run out of ammunition, out of fuel, out of pilots. Then his sensors officer spoke up. "Commander, we're detecting new signatures entering the system." "More human ships." "Yes, sir. Multiple groups coming in from different directions. Analyzing now." Pulled up the data and felt his confidence waver. The new arrivals weren't coming from anywhere in the Sol system. They were coming from outside, from other star systems. "How many?" he asked. "Still counting, sir. At least 800 ships, maybe more." 800 ships appearing from other systems. How was that possible? The humans weren't supposed to have faster-than-light travel yet. "Check those readings," he ordered. "They must be wrong." But the readings weren't wrong. Human ships were pouring into the system from multiple directions, arriving from colonies and outposts the Dominion hadn't known existed. Generation ships that had launched decades ago and only recently reached nearby stars. Merchant vessels that had been converted to warships. Colony tugs that now carried missiles instead of cargo. And they were all converging on the Grand Armada. "Sir, should we split our forces to meet them?" his tactical officer asked. Hesitated. That was exactly what the humans would want. His fleet's strength was its cohesion. If he split it up to chase scattered groups, he'd lose his advantage. "No, we maintain formation. Let them come to us. We'll destroy them all together." But the humans didn't come together. They came in waves, from different angles at different times. A group of 50 ships would attack from above, forcing the Dominion to respond. Then another 100 would hit from the side, then more from below. They used the system's gravity wells, timing their attacks to come out of slingshot maneuvers around planets and moons at maximum speed. The battle spread across the entire inner system. It raged for days, then weeks. Ships died by the hundreds. Space became a graveyard of metal and frozen corpses, but the humans kept fighting. began to understand what had tried to warn the Council about. These weren't planet-bound primitives fighting a desperate last stand. These were void-born warriors fighting in their natural element. They could survive in space for weeks without resupply. They could repair ships using materials from asteroids. They could coordinate across vast distances because they'd been doing it their entire lives. And most terrifying of all, they weren't afraid to die. A human captain named proved that point. His destroyer, heavily damaged and out of ammunition, was surrounded by 3 Dominion cruisers. Any sane commander would have surrendered. Instead, aimed his ship at the largest cruiser and went a full thrust. "This is for Europa Station," he said over the open channel, naming the colony he'd grown up on. The colony the Dominion had destroyed 2 weeks earlier. His ship hit the cruiser at full speed. Both vessels exploded in a fireball that could be seen from Mars. The other 2 cruisers were caught in the blast and severely damaged. Across the battlefield, other human captains took note. When your home was gone, when your family was dead, when there was nothing left but vengeance, a ship could become a weapon all by itself. The Dominion had never faced an enemy willing to make such sacrifices. His fleet was still larger, still more powerful, but the losses were mounting faster than he'd anticipated. He'd lost over 700 ships now. The humans had lost even more, but they didn't seem to care. For every ship they lost, they fought harder. Then came the attack on Earth itself. Decided that destroying the human would break their spirit. He detached 300 ships and sent them to bombard the planet. It was a calculated move. The humans would have to defend their birthplace, and that would pull their forces out of position. The attack force reached Earth and began orbital bombardment. Cities burned. Continents were scorched. Millions died in the first hours. But the Dominion had made a critical mistake. They thought Earth was humanity's weakness, their soft center that could be exploited. They were right that humans cared about Earth, but they were wrong about how that caring would manifest. Every human ship in the system, regardless of what they'd been doing, turned toward Earth. Belt miners who'd never been to the planet, Martian colonists who'd spent their lives under red skis, station-born pilots who'd never felt more than minimal gravity. They all came. They came with a fury that shocked even themselves. Sarah was part of the response. She'd been fighting for weeks, running on stimulants and pure determination. Her fighter was barely holding together. But when the call came that Earth was under attack, she didn't hesitate. She and her wing reached Earth's orbit to find it filled with Dominion ships. The planet below was burning. She could see the fires from orbit, great swaths of destruction across the continents. "All wings, free attack," the fleet coordinator's voice came over the channel. "Make them pay for every meter." The human counterattack was ferocious. They didn't use tactics or strategy. They just attacked, throwing themselves at the Dominion ships with complete disregard for their own safety. Fighters rammed cruisers. Corvettes traded shots with dreadnoughts at point-blank range. Pilots whose ships were too damaged to fight set their reactors to overload and aimed themselves at enemy targets. The Dominion forces, unprepared for such suicidal tactics, broke. They scattered, trying to escape the swarm of human ships that seemed to come from everywhere at once. In 6 hours of brutal fighting, all 300 ships of the attack force were destroyed or forced to retreat. Earth was saved, though forever, and humanity had learned something important. When they stopped fighting as separate factions and fought as one unified species, they were unstoppable. Received the news of the failed Earth attack with growing dread. He'd lost 300 more ships. His grand armada wasn't so grand anymore. He had perhaps 1,800 ships left, and they were scattered across the system, many of them damaged. The humans, impossibly, seemed to be growing stronger. More ships kept arriving from outside the system. They were pulling resources from colonies he hadn't known existed. They were adapting their tactics, learning from each engagement. "Sir," his tactical officer said quietly, I recommend we withdraw and request reinforcements." Stared at the tactical display. It showed a battlefield that stretched across billions of kilometers. It showed human ships everywhere, like insects in a hive. It showed his forces, still numerous but increasingly isolated. He thought about the Council's orders: conquer or exterminate the humans, show them that defiance of the Dominion leads only to death. But how do you conquer a species that has no single world to threaten? How do you exterminate people who live in thousands of scattered habitats across dozens of star systems? How do you defeat warriors who were born in the void and call it home? "Begin withdrawal protocols," he said finally. "We'll regroup at the outer system and—" "Sir, new contacts. Multiple human ships jumping in right on top of our position." His blood went cold. The humans had learned to predict his movements. They jumped in at close range, too close for his ships to maneuver properly, and they were already firing. The battle that followed was chaos. Human ships, many of them damaged and running on emergency power, threw themselves at his command fleet. They didn't care about tactics or survival. They only cared about destroying as many Dominion ships as possible. His flagship shuddered under repeated impacts. His shields failed. His weapons went offline. He saw a human frigate approaching, its bow aimed directly at his bridge. The last thing he saw before the impact was the name painted on the frigate's hull in human letters: "Remember Series." Then there was only fire and darkness. The death of Supreme Commander marked the beginning of the end for the Grand Armada. Without their leader, the Dominion forces fell into chaos. Ship captains began making their own decisions, some choosing to fight, others trying to retreat. The humans pressed their advantage ruthlessly. They'd learned that they relied heavily on centralized command, and now that command was gone. Within 3 days, the remaining Dominion ships were either destroyed, captured, or fleeing the system. The Grand Armada, the largest fleet ever assembled in history, was shattered. Of the 3,000 ships that had entered the Sol system, fewer than 400 escaped. The victory had cost humanity dearly. Entire colonies were gone. Mars had suffered massive damage. Earth bore scars that would take generations to heal. The final casualty count was in the millions, but they had won. Sarah sat in her fighter, drifting among the debris field that had once been a Dominion battle group. Her fuel was nearly gone. Her weapons were empty. Her ship had so many holes in it that she'd lost count. But she was alive. "All pilots return to Rally Point Delta," a voice said over the comms. "The fleet's pulling back for resupply." Sarah acknowledged and began the long flight back to the nearest functioning station. As she flew, she passed the wreckage of hundreds of ships, both human and. She thought about her home habitat, destroyed in the first week of fighting. She thought about her friends who hadn't made it back. But they'd won. Against all odds, humanity had stood against the most powerful military force in known space and emerged victorious. The victory in the Sol system was only the beginning. The Dominion Council, stunned by the loss of the Grand Armada, went into emergency session. They debated for weeks about their next move. Some called for an even larger assault, for gathering every ship from every conquered world and crushing humanity once and for all. Others, quieter but more thoughtful, suggested a different approach. They'd lost over 3,000 ships. They'd lost their finest commander. They'd lost the appearance of invincibility. Maybe it was time to reconsider. While the council debated, humanity didn't wait. They'd learned something crucial during the battle. The Dominion was powerful, but it was also predictable. It relied on overwhelming force and intimidation. It had conquered 40 worlds, but it had never faced serious resistance. The humans had no intention of sitting back and waiting for the next attack. Fleet Admiral Torres, commanding from a rebuilt station near Jupiter, gathered his senior officers for a strategic meeting. On the screens before them were star maps showing Dominion territory. 40 systems, all connected by established trade routes and military supply lines. "We can't just defend anymore," Torres said. "We don't have the numbers for a long war of attrition, but we have something the Dominion doesn't. We can live in space indefinitely. We can operate without supply lines back to Earth. We can go anywhere." "You're suggesting we take the fight to them," one of his officers said. "I'm suggesting we show them what it means to fight a species that calls the void home." Over the next months, human fleets began operating in Dominion space. They weren't large fleets, usually just a dozen ships or less, but they were devastating. They'd strike at supply convoys, then vanish into the empty dark before Dominion patrols could respond. They'd sabotage orbital stations and fade away like ghosts. They'd hit targets and be gone before anyone realized they'd been there. The humans used tactics the Dominion couldn't counter. They'd set up temporary bases on ice-rich moons in the outer reaches of systems, using them for resupply and repair. They'd hide in asteroid fields and comet clouds. They'd use gravity assists from gas giants to achieve speeds that caught Dominion defenders by surprise. Sarah was part of these operations. Her squadron, now called the Series Reapers in honor of their fallen home, specialized in hit-and-run attacks. They'd jump into a system, destroy their target, and jump out before the Dominion could organize a response. On one mission, they hit a major shipyard in the ETH system. The yard was building new warships to replace losses from the Sol campaign. Sarah's squadron came in fast and hard, launching missiles at the incomplete ships still in their construction berths. The yard's defenses were designed to counter large-scale attacks, not small, fast raiders. By the time Dominion fighters scrambled to respond, the Reapers were already gone. 10 new warships destroyed before they ever launched. The Dominion had lost months of construction work in 20 minutes. These attacks spread across Dominion space like wildfire. Human raiding groups hit targets in a dozen systems simultaneously. The Dominion tried to respond, but they couldn't be everywhere at once. For every raiding party they stopped, 3 more struck elsewhere. The conquered species under Dominion rule began to take notice. If humanity, with just one core system, could strike the Dominion with impunity, maybe the Dominion wasn't as invincible as they claimed. Unrest began spreading. Rebellions broke out on 3 worlds. The Dominion had to pull back military forces to maintain control, which only made them more vulnerable to human attacks. The Council finally admitted what many had known for months. The war was unwinnable. They couldn't defeat an enemy that refused to stand still, that could survive anywhere in space, that had no central authority to threaten or negotiate with. Humanity was too spread out, too adaptable, too determined. 6 months after the battle for Sol, the Dominion sent a diplomatic envoy to request peace negotiations. The message was transmitted to Earth, Mars, the Belt Stations, and every other major human settlement. It was a formal request for a ceasefire and discussion of terms. The human response was unified, which surprised the Dominion. Despite having no single government, despite being spread across multiple systems, humanity spoke with one voice. They would negotiate, but only on their terms. The Dominion would acknowledge human sovereignty over all systems humanity had colonized. They would pay reparations for the colonies destroyed, and they would guarantee safe passage for human ships through any Dominion territory. The Dominion Council had no choice but to agree. The peace treaty was signed aboard a neutral space station in the buffer zone between human and Dominion space. Representatives from both sides met in a conference room with windows looking out at the stars. Sarah was there, representing the Belt colonies. She'd been promoted to captain after the war, given command of a new destroyer built from salvaged Dominion technology. She stood among diplomats and military leaders, still young but with eyes that had seen too much. The representative, a council member named N, spoke first. "The Dominion acknowledges that continued conflict serves neither of our peoples. We agree to the terms you've proposed." "And you'll leave us alone," asked, representing Earth's combined governments. "No more threats, no more attacks." "We will leave you alone," N said. "But understand, this is not just about you. What you've done here will change everything. Every species under our rule now knows that resistance is possible. Our empire is fracturing. You've destroyed more than just our ships. You've destroyed the fear that kept our empire together." There was no pride in his voice, just weary acceptance. The treaty was signed. The war was officially over. As the delegates left the conference room, Sarah found herself standing at the window, looking out at the stars. So many of them, scattered across the infinite dark. Humanity had claimed only a handful of systems, but it felt like they'd claimed something more important. They'd proven that space itself could be a home, that the void between stars wasn't empty and hostile, but full of possibility, that a species born on one small world could adapt to live anywhere. "Thinking about going back?" a voice asked. She turned to see Admiral Tors standing beside her. "Back where?" she replied. "Ceres is gone. Earth feels like an alien world to me. This is home now." She gestured at the stars. "All of it." Tors nodded. "That's what they never understood. They thought we were defending Earth. We were defending everything. Every rock we'd built a home on, every station we'd constructed, every ship we'd lived in. We're not planet-bound anymore. We're everywhere." News of the treaty spread quickly through both human and Dominion space. For humanity, it was celebrated as a great victory. For the Dominion, it marked the beginning of a long decline. Within a year, 3 conquered species declared independence, and the Dominion lacked the military strength to stop them. But the treaty's effects reached farther than anyone anticipated. Other species in the galaxy, those who'd never had contact with either humans or began hearing stories about the war. They heard about a young species that had fought off an empire, about warriors who'd been born among the stars and used the void itself as a weapon. 5 years after the war ended, Sarah stood on the bridge of her ship, the Remembrance, named for those who died in the conflict. She was older now, 37, with silver starting to show in her dark hair. Her crew was a mix of people from across human space. Some had been born on Earth, others on Mars, others in the Belt or the outer stations. It didn't matter anymore. They were all void-born now, all children of the stars. "Captain, we're approaching the Vega system," her navigator said. "Right on schedule." The Remembrance and its escort ships were on a diplomatic mission. A species called the had requested contact with humanity. They wanted to learn from the humans, to understand how they'd adapted to space so completely. As the ships dropped out of faster-than-light travel, Sarah looked at the showing the system ahead. 4 planets, 2 asteroid belts, dozens of moons, empty space full of potential. "Send our greetings," she ordered. "Let them know we come in peace." But even as she said it, she thought about the weapons her ship carried, about the combat training every crew member had gone through. Humanity had learned a hard lesson. Peace was good, but strength was necessary. The galaxy was full of dangers, and only those who could survive would thrive. The war had changed humanity forever. They'd lost millions, but they'd gained something too: confidence, purpose, unity across all their scattered colonies and stations. They'd proven that they belonged among the stars, not as visitors but as natives. Back on Earth, monuments were being built to honor those who'd fallen. Names carved in stone, millions of them, representing the terrible cost of victory. But there were also new ships being launched every month, new colonies being founded, new stations being constructed in previously unexplored systems. Humanity was expanding faster than ever, not running from Earth, but spreading out to claim their birthright. The galaxy was vast and full of wonders, and now they knew they could face whatever challenges it held. In the Dominion capital, a historian named Ara sat in her study, writing an account of the war for future generations. She'd interviewed survivors, reviewed battle records, studied humanity's tactics. Now she was trying to make sense of it all, trying to understand how such a young species had defeated an empire that had stood for 3,000 cycles. She wrote, "We made a fundamental error in our understanding of the humans. We believed their strength came from their home world, from Earth. We were wrong. Earth was just where they started. Their true home was the black between the stars, the void we crossed but never truly inhabited. They didn't adapt to space. They became space. They were born in rotating habitats and zero-gravity stations. They grew up playing in asteroid fields and learning to fly before they could walk. We invaded their home thinking we were the hunters. We learned too late that we were the prey." She paused, considering her next words carefully. The lesson for future generations is clear. Never underestimate a species that has adapted to live in the void itself. The universe is vast and full of wonders, but also dangers. Humanity has shown us that the greatest danger might not be hostile aliens or cosmic catastrophes. It might be the species we dismiss as primitive, the ones who learn to thrive where others merely survive. Ara finished her report and filed it in the Dominion archives. She doubted many would read it. The Dominion was too busy trying to hold onto what remained of its empire. But perhaps someday, when things had settled, someone would find her words and learn from them. The galaxy moved on. New alliances formed. Trade routes opened. Conflicts arose and were resolved. But everyone remembered what had happened in the Sol system. They remembered that armies had fallen to starborn humans, and they adjusted their thinking accordingly. Sarah retired from military service at age 45. She'd served for 15 years after the war, training new pilots and exploring new systems. But eventually, she wanted something different. She bought a small ship, just big enough for herself and a small crew, and set out to explore the regions beyond mapped space. On her last night before departure, she stood in an observation deck on Titan Station and looked out at Saturn's rings. They glowed golden in the distant sunlight, beautiful and eternal. She thought about her childhood home on Ceres, destroyed so long ago. She thought about the friends she'd lost in the war. She thought about everything humanity had been through. "They asked us to surrender," she said softly to the empty room. "They thought we'd give up because we were young and weak. They didn't understand that we'd already survived the hardest thing anyone can survive. We'd left our birth world and made the void our home. After that, everything else was easy." She turned away from the window and headed toward the docking bay where her ship waited. Out there, beyond the map systems, beyond the known routes, were more stars, more possibilities, more homes waiting to be built. Humanity had learned its place in the galaxy, not as conquerors or empire builders, but as survivors and explorers. They would spread as far as the stars would let them, building homes in the empty dark, raising children who'd never know gravity, creating a civilization that spanned the void itself. The Dominion had tried to stop them and failed. Others might try in the future. They would fail too, because they would make the same mistake. They would see humanity's ships and stations and think they could be destroyed. They would miss the essential truth. You cannot destroy a species whose home is everywhere. You cannot defeat warriors who were born in the void and learned to fly before they could walk. You cannot conquer those who have already conquered the hardest frontier of all, the infinite dark between the stars. Humanity had become what they'd always been meant to be: starborn, void-bred, unconquerable, and the galaxy would never forget the lesson they'd taught when armies fell to those who called the cosmos home.